Hey, everybody, welcome to the Free at Last podcast. I'm Mick.
And I'm Tammy.
We're coming to you live from the Appalachian Mountains right here in the home of Eastern Kentucky. We're very excited about tonight's podcast. We have a very special guest, another one that I met on the great world of TikTok. She has her own podcast over there called the Cultimatum. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Okay.
The that's a big word for a hillbilly.
Mhm.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our guest, Miss Melody Post.
Hi, Melody.
Hi, Mick and Tammy. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here and share my story.
Oh, we're
Awesome.
glad that you're here and you just settle right in. And we don't have any questions that we have, outlined out or anything. We just let our guests speak and we look forward to hearing what you want to share with the world.
Okay, perfect. If at any point in my story you have a question, let me know. Just squeeze in there, interrupt if you need to, and just say, hey, wait a minute, I got a quick question.
Okay.
All right.
So feel free. Um, Go ahead. Go ahead, Mick. Did you have a question to
So,
start?
yeah, if you want to, just take us. We know that you were in a cult, so just take us back. Was you born into the cult, or was you recruited, or take us back, however that started, and we'll get to like how you got out.
Okay. Well, actually, I was not recruited. My dad was recruited. My dad was recruited back in 1989 into the House of Yahweh. They are a polygamous doomsday cult. They were not a polygamous cult at the time that I joined with my family. I was 14 when we joined. I had a younger sister who was 12, so I joined with my mom, my dad, my mother, and my sister. So I was not born into it, but I was a young teenager and easily influenced when I went into it. Um, and my dad found it through a cousin who was kind of a zealot and searching for the truth. And he came across some of their propaganda, and my dad ended up with it. Ironically, that cousin never joined the
Oh,
cult or was part of the
wow.
group, but we did.
uh,
um, Another ironic thing is that when we got some of the propaganda, one of them had some of their holy garment pictures on the cover of it, and the first thing my mom said was, that looks like a cult. We should have went with that instinct. We didn't. We overlooked it. um and at that time, I would say the teachings were a mix of Judaism and Christianity, and by that I mean that they went with a lot of the Old Testament teachings. They actually taught that we needed to follow the 613 laws that are written in the Old Testament of the Bible,
Yeah.
and they were extremely strict about those laws. And the leader himself claimed to be one of the two witnesses spoken of in Revelation.
Wow.
Supposedly, him and his brother were the two witnesses. His brother actually had another house of Yahweh in Odessa, Texas, if I'm remembering right. I believe it was Odessa. And they were supposedly going to be the two witnesses that are spoken of in Revelations.
Wow.
Um, and with us we were there only for about a year or so, maybe a little over a year, when his brother actually died. And that's when I think my dad certainly started questioning, like, hmm, well, how can they be the two witnesses if his brother's now dead? That
Yeah.
seems like a false prophet, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That was
Uh,
kind of our first clue. But we still didn't leave, and I think part of that was because I think by that time myself, my sister, and my mother were a little bit more indoctrinated, and I think my dad felt like he needed to persuade us that it was the right thing to do to leave. And of course, when you stay in a place like that, you just get deeper and deeper and
Yeah.
right.
deeper in.
Yeah.
um, I did later learn that Israel Hawkins, who was the leader of the House of Yahweh, was a con man even well before he started the House of Yahweh.
Hmm.
He did cons in his teen years and throughout his adult life. He was always a con man. And
Wow.
I think this was his biggest con. The House of
Mm-hmm.
Yahweh was his big con. Um, and
And
within about, oh,
what
go
was
ahead.
what was like the number of congregational members that were at that time?
I will say I know that, like, they had feasts, the three feasts
Mhm.
that are spoken of in the Old Testament that we kept, which was
Mhm.
Tabernacles, Pentecost, and Passover, and we did have to be there in attendance at those feasts. And at that time, I believe there were probably maybe 3 to 500. They
Oh
claimed
wow.
to have more like 800, but they were saying some of those were people out of the country and stuff. I
Okay.
do know they tend to inflate their numbers like online. You'll notice that if you go to their Facebook page, a lot of the people that supposedly are following them, they are not real accounts. They're accounts with profiles that don't even have pictures. So I don't really know what their real numbers would be now. I think that they probably would not give an honest answer on that.
Yeah. Okay.
And I know that their membership has severely declined
Mhm.
because of the strict teachings, and
Oh
they
yeah.
got stricter and stricter after I left.
Wow.
So
Um,
for him to say that or they were prophets, um did they like try to do anything miraculous or like, you know what I mean? Like
no,
that
he I don't re- he never performed any miracles or did anything like that, like making somebody get up out of a wheelchair and walk. That was nothing like that.
Okay.
yeah.
But he did claim that it was biblical and used biblical references, saying that he changed his name to Israel and that his brother was named Jacob. And they had all these scriptural references saying that that was going to be what the two witnesses were going to be. And I will say that his original name was Buffalo Bill. He was named by an older sibling. Apparently the parents ran out of names and they let the older sibling name him. So his name legally was Buffalo Bill until he changed it to Yeshua Hawkins.
Hmm.
Wow.
Um,
Oh.
Within a year of being there, I was betrothed, which for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that's engaged, but we called it a betrothal,
Mhm.
to the leader's son by the age of 16. After having only been there for about a year.
Mhm.
Um, and all of the young people that were there started getting married and having babies young, like they do in most cults. I think it's a way of getting more followers. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
what better
Mhm.
followers are there than people that are born into it, right? Because
Right.
those people are indoctrinated right from the start. And I will say that I was one of the lucky ones that I actually did graduate high school and get a diploma. But I did not walk. And I will say that that was at the insistence of my dad, who
Mhm.
said that he did not want me to get married until I graduated high school.
Mhm.
In hindsight, I really believe that was more of my grandfather's influence because my grandfather really valued education and my dad worked for his father, which was my grandfather. And I know that if he had let me get married without graduating high school, my grandfather, he would have never heard the end of it from his
Right.
dad.
Yeah.
So I give my grandfather credit for that.
Yeah.
Because there were a lot of people in the cult that did not get their diplomas
Mhm.
or any sort of formal education. Now, mind you, before getting into this cult, I was thinking I was going to become a teacher. I was going to go on to higher education,
Mhm.
which I never did do. It changed the trajectory of my future. Um, and I got married and moved to Texas. Actually, I did not walk in my graduation because it happened to fall on the same day as my wedding. So
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't walk on my in my and honestly, I wouldn't have been able to walk in my graduation ceremony anyway because it fell on a Saturday, which was the Sabbath,
Sabbath.
and we
Yeah.
weren't
Mhm.
allowed to do anything that was not directly worship related.
So you did
Um,
go to public. You were allowed to go to public school
Yes,
in
at that
Texas.
time we
Mhm.
were. And actually, my family never actually moved to the location of the cult, which was just outside of Abilene, Texas, in a small town called Clyde, Texas.
Mhm.
Um, except for me. My family always lived in Michigan, and there were people that didn't live in the area. We're called out of towners, and when
Mhm.
we come in for the feasts, and I think he kind of would pick and choose who he wanted to move down to Texas, and the people he would say, no, no, stay where you are. And it
Yeah.
was pretty much
Wow.
financially based. If you were making enough money and paying your tithes, he wanted you to stay where you were.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If you weren't making a lot of money, why don't you just come down here and work for us?
Yeah.
So then you would move down there and you'd
Yeah.
do the work of Yahweh. which is what I did after I got married. I was, working for the House of Yahweh. I say working loosely because we were working 40-hour weeks. Both my husband and I worked 40-hour weeks, and together we made $120 a week.
Wow.
And for years, I had thought that we were both making $60 a week. I later found out that I was making 40 and he was making 80 because I was a woman.
Wow.
And so he was making twice as much as me. I
Yeah.
did not realize that at the time. I found that out later because we
Mhm.
got one check between the two of
Yeah.
us.
Mhm.
So it was
Mhm.
kind of convoluted who was making what.
Now, with you being engaged to this husband before you married him, was it somebody that you were able to choose, or was you chosen? And like, how does that play into? Did you love your husband?
That's a very good question, Tammy. And
Mhm.
honestly, I did choose him. He was the leader's
Okay.
son. I
Mhm.
did choose him. He chose me. But
Mhm.
later, after I left, there was that changed. That changed, and they had people had to start asking permission for
Yeah.
who they could marry. The elders had to start deciding who you could and couldn't marry, and most of the young girls were given to the leader himself. He
Yeah.
had
Mhm.
between at the time of his death, it's estimated that he had somewhere between 60 and 100 wives.
Wow.
They
Wow.
don't really know for sure because most of these ceremonies were done in secret and it was all done behind closed doors, and nobody was supposed to talk or know about what was going on.
Wow.
um but in my case, yes, I married. I loved him. I did love him at the time that I married him, and I believed that I was going to have a perfect little life. I mean, even though it was a doomsday cult and we were preparing for the end of the world, I believed up until then I was going to have a perfect little life.
Oof.
Um, I was pregnant within 6 months of being married, and I had a very dangerous home birth while I was still in the cult. I never saw a doctor during my pregnancy. I only
Wow.
saw
Wow.
cult appointed midwives. Um, it was a dangerous home birth because I was 16 days overdue and
Wow.
the baby was 9 pounds, 4 ounces.
Wow.
Um, and we all know in a hospital, they probably would have done an ultrasound. First of all, they wouldn't have let me go 16 days
Right.
overdue, right? They would have induced
Right.
labor.
Mhm.
Second, if they saw the baby was that big, they would have said,
Mhm.
hey, this baby needs to be taken C-section.
Yes.
Um,
Wow.
and that was a scary time. My family, actually, I happened to give birth during one of the feasts, and my extent, meaning my family, meaning my parents and my sister, happened to be there at the time my son was born, and it was kind of a crazy birth because there were lots of people from out of town, so there were like four or five midwives there, and family. It felt like a three-ring circus. That's all I
Right.
can tell you, is that there
Yeah.
was just so much going on, and he was born with the cord wrapped around his neck.
Mm.
My dad, I was in labor for 48 hours. My dad wanted to rush me to a hospital, just let me take her to the hospital. They would not let my dad make that decision because after I got married, my dad was no longer my head. My husband was my head, and he was the only one allowed to make a decision like that
Wow.
for me.
Mhm.
Since then, they changed it to the cult leader only being able to make those decisions. Last I heard, they had a board. They now have a board of elders. I believe it's 12 elders
Mhm.
that maybe vote to make decisions like this. I did hear that some of the teachings are becoming a little less strict since Israel Hawkins' death.
Mhm.
So I'm going to hope that that's a good thing. But I do know, and I have heard a lot of the young people are leaving.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of not just the strictness, but they have so much more access to information.
Mhm.
They can go and Google the name of this place and they can see what people who've left are saying, even though they're technically not supposed to, right? You're not supposed to
Yeah.
go searching for that stuff. That's asking for sin to come
Right.
into your life. And
Yeah. Well,
um,
like now, like we're the headlines, like with everything going on in the Middle East. Like, if you were there right now, would they play off that? Like, kind of like, oh, this is our time because look what's happening with Israel and Iran.
Oh yes, oh yes, that would be it. I mean, we they were saying that at the time that we were there. That there was a
Mm-hmm.
there was one year where there was a lot of flooding along the Mississippi River. Oh, this is a sign that the end is near. And I'm thinking, at the time I believed it, and I thought,
Yeah,
oh, it probably is. And I've since learned that I don't know if you're familiar with Seventh Day Adventists or the Jehovah's Witnesses and a lot of these other bigger doomsday groups. They've been predicting the end of the world and using current events to do that
Yeah.
for 100 or 200 years
Right.
or more
Mm-hmm.
or more.
Yeah.
So you could use whatever's going on, right, to say, oh, this is a sign. It's the end.
yeah, yeah.
Now, during this time, was it close to? Was it close to Waco? Like, was the air?
Actually, yes. Yes,
Oh
it was
wow.
we're not too far from Waco, maybe a 2 or 3 hour drive if I'm just
Mm-hmm.
estimating, I don't really remember
Yeah.
exactly, but yes, in the same area. And he actually, when Waco happened, the cult leader actually used the Waco thing to say that Yahweh had this happen to protect us.
Oh wow.
Wow.
This happened so that it so that the government and the uh, who was it that it went in there? Was that the ATF?
The ATF and FBI.
Yeah, basically so that they would learn a lesson from attacking this group, and so
Yeah.
they wouldn't attack the house of Yahweh. So Yahweh supposedly created Waco and killed all those innocent people to protect us, because
Wow.
apparently we were special and our lives were supposedly worth more than those who died in the Waco incident, right?
See, I
So
thought I thought they would spin it like David Koresh was a false prophet, so he got his end and
well,
because
they kind of said that too, but they also
Yeah.
put in there that basically this all was created because supposedly everything was about us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Wow.
mean,
Yeah.
they're that narcissistic that they believe it's all about them. Um, and some of the I'll go and I'll tell you some of the controlling aspects of the group when I was married. It's things that happened particularly personally to me. My dad had kind of warned me because I think my dad was starting to see the group for what it was. That you do know when you get married and you move down there to Texas that Israel Hawkins is going to try to control your life. And I'm like, I'm 18, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, you don't know what you're talking about, Dad. We're adults, and
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be grown up and married, and he can't do that. Oh, did he ever do that?
Oh yeah.
yeah,
um, he did everything from if he saw our he we lived in a trailer on his farm property, and he could see our trailer out his window,
Mm-hmm.
and he anytime that our lights were on after 10 p.m., our paycheck was docked by
Oh my
$10.
gosh. Wow.
Yeah. So he controlled our bedtime.
wow,
That's how controlling it was. And at one point, we tried to get an outside job, meaning that we weren't making a lot of money. So we had driven by and saw one of these farms that was close by, was looking for somebody to muck their stalls for
Mm-hmm.
like $40 a week or $50. I don't even remember the amount. Because the amount really wasn't important for
Yeah.
a fee. They were looking for somebody to muck the stalls. So
Mm-hmm.
my husband and I at the time were like, yeah, this is a good deal. It'll get us a little extra money. So we started mucking stalls for them like 3 days a week. And Israel Hawkins got wind of this, and
Mm-hmm.
he called my husband into his office, and he said, well, how much are you making doing that? And he told him, and he said, oh, well, I'm going to be docking your pay by $50 until you quit that job. So he
wow,
made
Wow.
it financially, he made it not advantageous, right?
yeah,
Why
Right.
would we
Yeah.
do more work for the same amount of money?
yeah,
Right.
So we were like, okay, I guess we have to quit this job, because he wanted to be the only person controlling our income. He didn't want any other source of money to be coming in from anyone else so that he could control us.
Mm-hmm. And this was his own son, correct?
And this was his own son.
wow,
Wow.
Exactly.
wow,
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. That was and that's just the tip of the iceberg of some of the controlling
Mm-hmm.
things that went on. But um, I'll start to get into a little bit of kind of when things started to shift, and it was
Mhm.
actually late in my pregnancy. They came out with a sermon, and I had heard rumors about this before it came out in a sermon, that they were going to start teaching polygamy and multiple
Mhm.
marriage. Actually, when I heard the rumor, I actually just thought to myself, this isn't true. It's just a rumor. I'm not even going to give this a second thought. And until it came over the pulpit
Mhm.
and it was official that they were going to start teaching multiple marriage and men were going to be allowed to have more than one wife. And yeah, I'm sure you guys are going to be shocked at the reason. The reason is because he was caught cheating on my mother in law
Oh.
Oh,
with his
wow.
secretary. And he said, "Oh, I haven't sinned. I have done nothing wrong. I have nothing to apologize for. This is part of Yahweh's law, and all of the men are going to be allowed to have multiple wives now.
Wow.
So
It's
I've done nothing wrong."
he would be like, "It's my fault because I didn't explain the revelation to you guys. You guys didn't get it
Yes,
yet."
Well,
yes, exactly.
that's like changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game. you know.
Absolutely, Tammy, and that's what my mother said to my husband at one
Uh-huh.
point. The feast after this came out, my mother said to him, "Do you plan on having more than one wife?" And he said, "Not at this time." Oh, my mom
Wow.
was hot. She said,
Yeah.
"Wrong answer, wrong answer. When I let you marry my daughter, it was with the
Mhm.
understanding that she would be your only wife. And that's not fair.
Yeah.
You married her under false pretenses if you think you're going to have multiple wives."
And
Wow.
that's one thing that me and Tammy always talk about when we watch like the polygamy shows is it's like all these men that have these different wives is like how are they not like just just what would be the term?
Like okay, yes, sexual like infections. Like, why do
Like
they not have, or do they have like? You would think you
you
were,
would think there would be like
yeah.
a hot outbreak there. like,
Okay, well, here's the deal. I got another story for you. We'll add this one in because this is actually on the list of things that I wanted to talk about.
Good.
One of the things that he started teaching, and this was after I left, mind you, was that STDs caused global warming.
it's
Mind you, he
Okay.
actually said this on the
Wow.
Nancy Grace show. If you've ever watched
Wow.
Nancy Grace and you know
Mhm.
her show, he
Yes.
actually was interviewed by her because he was arrested for this polygamy teaching.
Mhm.
wow.
And
Yes.
he said STDs caused global warming, and and that he also had a bunch of pictures of blown up genitals with STDs all over the lobby of the sanctuary for children
Oh
and
my
everybody to
word.
see to scare them about
Wow.
these STDs. Now he said the
Wow.
STDs were all caused from the outside world, and that's where the STDs came from, and all the women had to start covering their faces, wearing gloves when they went into public. They had to cover their eyes. They looked like they were wearing burqas. They had to cover their wrists, their
Wow.
shoulders, their ankles. Everything had to be covered. Now, mind you, I have since found out that he got an STD from one of his multiple wives. And I'm like,
Wow.
that's why he was paranoid about STDs. And
Wow.
I guess he wanted to be able to tell the congregation that he got it from global warming. I don't know.
Yeah,
There's
like
crazy stuff here.
how did the climate get involved in that? It's like,
You
wow.
know,
It's like there might be warmth, but I don't think it's global.
yeah, exactly. No, that burning sensation is something
Yeah.
else, sir. Oh gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know really where his thought process was with all of that, but that was one of the kooky teachings that happened
Mhm.
after I left, and I later had heard the reason for it. Um but I think that um when I was there, I was worried about my safety at this
Mhm.
time, because what happened when this multiple marriage teaching came out is that myself and my husband and um, one of the other children of the cult leader all sided with my mother-in-law, and we rallied behind her and we were supportive of her. I mean, this broke her heart.
Mhm.
This She was devastated, and I just kept, even though there was part of me that believed I had to start accepting this teaching, there was still a really big part of me that just kept thinking this cannot be right, because I saw how much pain it was bringing her, and I'm just like,
Right. Yeah.
what creator would bring this amount of pain on someone? I don't understand this.
Yeah.
And then I would say, oh, but I have to accept it because it's Yahweh's law. And then I would be like, is it though? And then I'd be like, I have to accept it. And then the part of me would go, can I really share my husband? I'm a pretty jealous person. I don't know that I can do that. Um, and so we ended up actually getting excommunicated. And I believe that there was a lot that went into that. I believe, first of all, I think we were being spied upon. I think there were
Mhm.
listening devices in our homes. I think there
Yeah.
were listening devices on our phones. And I think that, and they were, there was one night they were somebody, I'm sure somebody from the cult, because this was a gated property, was shining windows in our flashlights in our windows and woke us up in the middle of the night. I don't know what they were. I don't know if it was just a fear tactic because it did scare me.
Yeah.
And this is when we were kind of on our way out anyway, meaning we were getting ready to leave because we didn't agree with this stuff that was going on.
So
And I
your
think that
husband at that time, he knew that stuff that his father was doing was not good. Like he
he was
had the
going back and
information.
forth like me. You know,
Okay.
he was having a really a hard time differentiating and having a spiritual struggle with this.
Yeah.
And so he would go back and forth like I did. And at one point I had actually stated that okay, if we are going to do this multiple marriage thing, it would have to be somebody we both got along with. And I started naming
Mhm.
like traits. They would have to be somebody who did this or somebody like this. And then I mentioned a name of a girl that was really sweet that was a friend of mine.
Mhm.
And he actually said, well, maybe the next feast we can start courting her. And I was like, whoa, we were talking hypothetical here.
Yeah. We?
Yeah.
Who's this
yeah,
we?
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
we were going to start courting her.
Wow.
And so he entertained the idea at
Mhm.
some points in this too, because we were having a spiritual struggle with changing and
Yeah.
shifting. And these cults and groups do this all the time.
Mhm.
The teachers change at the whim of the leader. Whatever the leader wants to do at that moment, the teachings change and evolve. Or whatever he wants, however he wants to control the congregation, they'll change the rules based on that. You know, I know of one cult where the leader didn't like animals, so nobody was allowed to have pets because he didn't like animals. It's just bizarre stuff they come up with, right?
So
Wow.
just out of curiosity, like was you guys like allowed access to the Bible, or was it just the prophet that had the Bible access to it to teach out of?
We had access to a Bible, and it was called the Book of Yahweh, and it was basically like a King James translation, but all the names in it were changed. All the names of God were changed to Yahweh. All the names of Jesus were changed to Yeshua,
Yeah.
and all the Hebrew names like Peter was Kepha, and I can't think of some of the other ones. Nathaniel, no, Nathaniel was still Nathaniel. Jedediah was Yedidiah.
Mhm.
So they changed them all to like Hebrew names.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had a translation of the Bible. Now, mind you, anytime there was a scripture that was found that didn't align with the teachings of the house of Yahweh, we would, at the beginning of a sermon, be given these little stickers. And these stickers were put into our Bibles with a new translation of a scripture.
Mm.
So it was
Wow.
constantly being retranslated throughout
Yeah.
my time there. I had,
Mhm.
I don't know, probably 100 or more stickers in my Bible
So it
before
was
I
like
left.
the new book of Yahweh,
Yes,
and then the
yes,
new
exactly.
book of
Yes. Oh,
Wow.
through our research, we found that this was mistranslated because of this, this, and this. For example, um, there is a scripture in the New Testament. I cannot remember where it is, but it says that um, an elder shall be the husband of one wife. And
Mhm.
in order to have that comply with the multiple marriage teaching, they said that the true translation of that scripture was that an elder shall be in unity with all of his
Well,
wives.
Oh, yeah.
I was
Yeah.
So
thinking, I was
Wow.
thinking like the elder should be married to only one uno dos tres.
they could have done that too. I mean, they just took it a different direction.
Wow.
Wow. Mhm.
But
So
I will
just out
say,
of curiosity, like, has there ever been like time where they put a sticker on, and then like over time it's like, well, let's take that one back off because you know.
I did not experience that, but I'm sure that that probably happened after I left. And they actually did more than just have their own Bible after I left. They now have a whole new book, kind of like the Mormons have the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
The House of Yahweh now has the Book of Israel because they took all of his sermons and translated them into Word, and they turned that into their own separate book of his teachings, as
Wow.
if he was a prophet that was worthy of having. Basically, he should have been had his own book of in the Bible, but he didn't.
Wow.
So they just have
Wow.
his own separate book now, where they have to follow all of the teachings in that book as well. Which, mind you, I know he contradicted himself a lot because he would say one thing, and then when he didn't like it or his mind changed or shifted, he would change it, and it would be another thing. He would teach another
Wow.
thing. So, um, and I'm going to touch a little bit too on how being in a cult like this doesn't just damage you and my immediate family that joined with me. It does damage to your relationships with all of your external
Mm-hmm.
family members as
Yeah.
well. We did a lot of pushing away, I'll say, or ostracizing
Mm-hmm.
ourselves from like my grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, extended family members, because we were no longer allowed to celebrate Christmas. And that meant we couldn't accept gifts because if we accepted a Christmas present, it was from Satan.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to do any Saturday activities, like I said, unless it had to do directly with worship. So let's say there was a family reunion. Family reunions tend to take place on a Saturday. We would not have been allowed to attend something like that because it fell on the Sabbath. So it really, those things separated us from our family and did damage. And there was a lot of damage control that had to
Yeah.
take place and healing in those relationships when we left, because it's not like I mean, now mind you, my most of my extended family did welcome us back in with open arms, and they were always there for us. um but feelings had been hurt,
Oh yeah.
Yep.
and there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of damage control that needed to take place, especially with my grandparents, because my sister and I were very close to my grandparents on my dad's side. They lived close to us. My dad worked for his father. We actually lived very close to where that business was. I mean, walking distance right down the hill from us. So we would walk. I mean, literally, when I checked the mail, I brought my grandfather his mail from his
Mm-hmm.
business every day when I got off the bus, and then I would go home.
Yeah.
And it did a lot of damage to those relationships. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's by design. And that's the kind of thing, when in hindsight, when you get out of a cult and you don't quite realize I mean, okay, on our podcast we say all the time, nobody joins a cult, right? Nobody wakes up in the morning and says,
Yeah.
I'm going to join a cult today. You
Yeah.
join a religious movement, a
Yep.
self-help group, an MLM, something that you think is good. You're wanting to do something good. You're on a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual healing journey. You want to change the world in some way, or you
Yep.
just want to be part of something, part of a
Mm-hmm.
community. You don't join a cult.
Right.
And I think
Right.
people that have never been in a cult don't always totally understand that, because they're
Mm-hmm.
thinking,
Yeah.
because they have that mindset of, I would never get involved in a
Mm-hmm.
cult or join a
Right.
cult. Well, when you're in the middle of joining it, you don't know that's what it
Yeah.
is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you don't know exactly like what you'll do, like when you get this mind of what success is, and you have to do certain things to obtain success. It's
Yes.
it, it's yeah.
No, the mind control that happens, to where you would say when you went into a group like that, well, I would never do this and this.
Yeah.
And then under the influence of that group, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing things you thought you would never do because
Yep.
you believe you have to do it. You believe
Right.
it's part of earning your salvation, or your spot in the cult, or your
Mm-hmm.
place in the kingdom, or your spot in heaven, whatever you
Right.
might want to call it.
Right.
Or in a maybe in a self-help group, it's for spiritual awareness of some sort, or to move on to a new level, to
Mm-hmm.
advance yourself in some way. um but it's it's scary how that, and it took me years to call it a cult. I
Oh yeah.
mean,
Mm-hmm.
even though there was, when I first left, there was part of me that believed it was it was not, I no longer believed it was the truth, but I didn't believe it was a cult. And I probably didn't call it a cult for at least probably 5 to 10 years after I left,
Yeah,
is
that
when
was
I
us.
called
Yeah.
it a cult.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it took me a long time to look at it in that way because I was in this process of deconstruction, and
Mhm.
that takes a lot of time too. It takes you know, here's an example of some of the, I'm going to call it religious trauma syndrome. I didn't know that term at the time. I have learned that term years later, but um, when I first left, I got a job at a fast food restaurant, and I'd worked there for about 5 or 6 days, and then that I came to the point where I was going to have to work on my first Saturday,
Mhm.
and there was still part of me that believed in what I had been indoctrinated with so strongly that I had an out and out panic attack that day that I was supposed to go to work, to the point I couldn't breathe. I was hyperventilating. I was so, my anxiety level was so high. I actually had the thought in my head, maybe I should just go back. Maybe I
Yeah.
should go back to
Wow.
the house of Yahweh because maybe that would relieve this anxiety, because I believed that if I went to work on a Saturday, that I was going to burn in hell. That's
Wow.
how strong the
Mhm.
indoctrination was. And that was when I did realize that I probably needed some help or some counseling, because I called and quit my job. I said I can't come in.
Yeah.
I'm emotionally unstable and I can't handle this, and I just can't come in. And I said just take
Mhm.
me off the schedule. And I did try to go and get some counseling. I went to a counselor, and this man looked at me like I had six eyes and three mouths,
Yeah.
and I he looked at me. He was, I think he, and I'm not faulting the counselor. I think the counselor was doing the best he could with the knowledge that he had.
Right.
But at
Yeah.
this point in time, this was 1994.
Mhm.
People didn't know a lot about religious trauma. People didn't know a lot about cults. And
Right.
I think very little to nobody hardly specialized in it. So, and nowadays with the internet, you can find you can find people that specialize specifically in healing from religious
Mhm.
trauma or cult trauma. And that I had, oh, I can't even imagine what that might have done for me in my young years had I been
Yeah.
able to actually find a counselor who specialized in this, because
Right.
I had to figure it all out on my own. I was, I felt like I was working through mud. I was just
Mhm.
swimming through mud trying to
Yeah.
figure it out. And a lot of it was just, I'm going to say exposure therapy, because
Mhm.
basically the more I started doing stuff and just forcing myself to work through it. Because another thing I didn't do for a long time, I didn't eat pork, because that's in the Old Testament that
Mhm.
you don't eat
Yeah.
pork.
Right.
And I didn't eat pork for a long time. And I slowly started reintroducing pork into my diet. Now, mind you, I am not a big fan of like pork chops and ham, but I
Mhm.
love pepperoni and bacon.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Bacon. That's my weakness too. And I
Yeah.
don't care
um,
what you say, turkey bacon is not the same.
it is not. I have to agree with you. It is not. It is. It is a close second, but if you have to give it a grade, real bacon, pork bacon gets an A, and turkey
Yeah.
bacon maybe gets a C minus.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, and and when I left, my husband actually did come with me. I didn't
Mhm.
know if he was going to, because we actually, when we were first officially excommunicated, and I was excommunicated myself, my husband, my mother in law, my sister in law, and her husband, all excommunicated on the
Wow.
same day.
Wow.
And it was because I think this is when we really started to believe there were listening devices, because we were talking about not attending the next Sabbath service. And that night, my other brother in law, the one who was still in it,
Mhm.
stopped and served us all with these official excommunication papers that had all the elders' signatures on it and the leader's signature. I don't know. Actually, it may not have had the leader's signature. I think he left himself out of that for legal purposes.
Mhm.
I'll double
So
check because
he
I still have a copy of that.
so he kicked his first original wife out. And
Yes, because
wow.
she filed for divorce.
Wow.
Wow. Well, that's good. I'm
Yes.
glad.
Oh, and
Yeah.
speaking of teachings changing, that brings me to another interesting teaching that changed. After we left and my mother-in-law filed for divorce,
Uh-huh.
after that, the teaching became that the devil is now a woman. And
Oh.
not only is the devil a woman, but she could be disguised and live in a farmhouse right down the road from you. And
Wow.
guess where my mother in law lived? In a
Wow.
farmhouse right down the road from the cult.
Wow.
Wow.
So he was literally not only pegging her as the devil, but then the
Mhm.
devil in general, in all of their teachings, the devil was now a woman.
Wow.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that's another good example of him changing the teaching because it fit his narrative. Because basically, he felt like she was the devil after she left.
So after you got out, did you have to deal like with? Did you have to worry about them coming after you?
We were worried about that. That was actually part of the reason that I ended up leaving Texas was because a friend of mine that also did not believe in the multiple marriage teaching and was pushing back on this polygamy teaching. She lived on the actual compound and she was trying to sell her trailer. She couldn't sell it to anybody on the outside because nobody wants to live on the compound of a cult, right?
Right.
And nobody on the inside wanted to give her a fair price. So they ended up burning her out. Now,
Wow.
mind
Wow.
you, they made it look like an accidental fire, but I know she was burned out. She knows anybody who
Wow.
knew what was going on knew what really happened there.
Wow.
Um, and I went to help her clean up and retrieve or save any items that were salvageable from the fire. And that was really a wake up call for me. Her little dog had died in the fire,
Oh.
and you could see the spot on the, she had already buried him, but you could see the spot on the carpet where the carpet was clean underneath where his body had laid, like almost like
Oh.
a chalk outline.
Mhm.
Wow.
And that scared me. I was like, this man is capable of a lot more evil than I was ever aware of or ever would have believed when I was a member and before I was excommunicated, to the point where I went home and I told my husband, hey, the baby and I are leaving. We're going back to Michigan
Mm.
because this is scary to me and I don't feel safe. I don't feel
Yeah.
like our child is safe. You're welcome to come with me, but I'm leaving with or without you. And he did leave with me. Now, mind you,
Okay.
our marriage
Mhm.
did not last.
Yeah.
Um, and I will go into a little bit of that because I do talk about that. And you guys, did you guys get married in your cult or were you married before you joined?
We
Yeah,
were
we were
married
married
before.
before, and then we
Mhm.
just got crazy and just jumped right in.
Because I do think that people that are married before have a better chance when they
Mhm.
get out of their marriage surviving. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you why. Because I have this little theory that when you're in a cult like that, you become a cult version of yourself, meaning you change who you are
Yep.
to fit in with that
Right.
group.
Mhm.
Everything you believe is determined for you. You're almost in a little bit of a robotic state. You
Yep.
just kind of do what you're supposed to do.
Right. Mhm.
And when you leave, you have to deconstruct who you are and figure out what you like, what you
Yeah.
want to do with your life,
Mhm.
what your personality is, because everything has been controlled. And when you get married in that cult like environment, you both marry cult versions of each other. You don't even know if you're
Mhm.
compatible. I mean, when
Right.
you leave, you don't even know who you are, let alone who your
Yeah.
spouse is.
Right.
And a lot of times I think, and I can tell you, there were a lot of young people that got married in that cult that left together as couples. And I can only think of one of probably 100, one that is still together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so those are not very good odds. And I think
Right.
that's because, and the other thing is that you're, this is a, my aunt made a comment of why I had married who I had married. And I started to answer it. And my sister was there and she said, wait. Now, Auntie, listen, you have to understand that we were in a cult. We only had a handful of people to choose from. And she said, there was a small pool. There was just this group of
Yeah.
teenagers, and it wasn't like we were choosing from the whole world. We had a very small group of people we could choose from. And I'm like, yeah, she's right. That's part of it, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, so that and that deconstruction process is it can be so draining, and
Mhm.
that is part of what brought, the other thing, I didn't put a Christmas tree in my house for 17 years after leaving. And
Wow.
that was a really
Mhm.
slow process for me too, because I wasn't getting counseling for it. I just one day saw this little Christmas tree, like that was maybe a foot tall. And
Mhm.
it was like white and sparkly and shiny, and it didn't have any ornaments on it. And I thought, it kind of just looks like a normal tree, but it's pretty.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to buy this and I'm just going to put it in my house and see how I feel about it. It's
Mhm.
kind of like a Christmas tree, but kind of not, right? So I
Mhm.
did it really, really slow. And eventually I do. Like now I have a full blown Christmas tree with
Yeah.
ornaments and a big,
Mhm.
and I do know that Christmas has pagan origins. So if anybody wants to write into your show and say, oh, Christmas is pagan, I know it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
I just don't really think it matters. I don't do it
Right.
for pagan reasons. I
Yeah.
just do
Yeah.
it because I enjoy it and it's fun and it's pretty.
And that's one thing I wanted to ask you. Like after you got out, did you still seek faith, or like like spirituality, or
You know what, Mick? That is a good question too. And I will be honest with you. I'm still deconstructing that.
Mhm.
I guess I would consider myself agnostic in that there's part of me that thinks, is there a creator, is there anything out there, and then there's this other part of me that I've experienced things in life that I just can't explain
Right.
without there
yeah,
being something.
yeah,
Mhm.
There's something there. I'm like, oh, okay, I did. So I really feel like that's a part that 30 years later I'm still trying to
Mhm.
figure that out.
yeah?
Yeah.
Because I know for us, it's like after we got out, I kind of had a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah.
And like I was praying because I was on the verge of like turning my back on faith and everything, as because I'm like, God, I'm cool with me and you, but this church nonsense, it's like I'm
Yeah.
done with that. And you know, only and I know this is going to sound crazy to a lot of people, and I swear I'm sane, but it's like I really felt like he led me back to him in a way, and I had to deconstruct like you're talking about, like because there was a lot of traditions, and like when we started going to other churches, I really had a fear of people in leadership because like what
Yeah.
we just I thought, well, they're probably all just like what we just came from, or if they had like any kind of personality like anywhere near the same, like,
Right. Yeah.
oh, they're one of them.
Yes. Oh, I can relate to that so much, Mick, because I will tell you that after leaving, I tried to go to other churches, including, and honestly, I can't remember for sure if I visited either the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Seventh day Adventist church
Mhm.
at one time, but I went in, I will use an analogy of like a woman who comes out of an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went in with my walls up and my hands up and saying, hey, don't tell me what the Bible means. Don't tell me what to believe. Don't tell me how to pray. And don't ask me for my money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I just was like this wall. Like I went in
Yeah.
with
And
all my
don't bother my
defenses up.
bacon. And
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
bother my bacon.
And don't bother my, exactly. Don't touch my bacon. But I went in with all these walls up, and that's part of that religious
Yeah.
trauma syndrome, right? You don't know. I mean, I don't know if you knew that term when you were going through it. I didn't
No,
know that
definitely
term.
not.
No, we didn't.
I just knew that I was triggered by things,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
was so triggered that anytime I sat, it didn't matter what church it was, I would leave and find something that I didn't like. Okay, I'm not going back because they said this, or
Yeah.
I'm not going back
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
they said that, and they asked me for money, or
Yeah.
the one of them that you had to sign a book as you went in, and then they called me at home and asked me if I wanted them to come to my house and explain what the Bible means, and I'm like, no, I don't. If I want to know what the Bible means, I'll open it up myself and I'll figure it out.
And it's
Yeah.
kind of weird because like you kind of go in self protect mode because
Yes.
like you're
Yes.
automatically thinking it's like you're not going to get to me like they did.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. No, you go in with your guard up. Absolutely. You go in with your walls up because you've been hurt before and you're like, I know this can happen. And even in these religious groups, there are bad bad actors out there and they're out
Mhm.
there to take advantage of people. And once you experience that, you can't unlearn it.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I know. I've learned a lesson here.
Yeah.
Um so and I actually ended up divorcing that husband, because like I said, it did not work. But I have been remarried. I've been married to my current husband now for 28 years. We raised three boys together, including my first son from my
Mm-hmm.
son from my first marriage. Um, and my husband raised him like he was his own, and he does still
Mm-hmm.
have a relationship with his dad,
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
with his real dad as well.
Yeah.
So he's got two dads. He's one of those lucky kids that has
Mm-hmm.
two dads. And that my husband had to be very, very patient with me
Oh yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
I was still dealing with all this trauma when he met me and married me, and I hadn't fully. Yeah, I'm still not fully deconstructed. I'm
Mm-hmm.
certainly leaps and bounds above where I was when I met him and married him. But he put up with a lot. I mean, even the no Christmas thing. I mean, we had to compromise on a lot of these things. An example was we didn't put a tree in our house and we didn't do Christmas, but I did allow his family, meaning his parents, to buy our kids Christmas presents, and we would go celebrate Christmas at their house.
Yeah.
We did allow that.
Yeah.
And that was my compromise. And that was probably partly what slowly got me into feeling more and more acclimated to bringing
Mm-hmm.
that back into my life and back into my home.
Yeah, because
Um,
you were raised up, until
Yeah.
you what 14? You said was when you got
14 when
into.
we went in,
So
yeah.
as a younger child, you had Christmas.
Yes, I did. I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, you're right. I did.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up with Christmas, and it
Mm-hmm.
went away. And I will say it went away a little bit even before the House of Yahweh. Probably I'm going to say 2 years or so before the House of Yahweh. My
Mm-hmm.
dad had started actually. He started with Herbert W. Armstrong. I'm sure you know who that is. The Worldwide Church of God.
Okay.
That was some of the teachings that my dad originally started with. Now, we never attended any of the Worldwide Church of God feasts or gatherings. We just started following some of the teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad started getting the House of Yahweh literature, and it took us off in that direction.
Yeah.
Um, and, that's, it's, there's so much complication, and it's so convoluted when you come out of these things. I mean, I didn't learn until my dad died in 2017, and I had found out from a friend of his that he had actually had a lot of guilt over the fact that
Mm-hmm.
I had gotten married and gotten so ingrained and involved
Yeah.
in the cult. And I thought, boy, I really wish that he would have shared that with me before he had
Mm-hmm.
passed, because I would have told him, Dad, it's okay. And I'm okay. Don't feel guilty about it. It
Yeah.
all kind of is what it is. And you were doing what you thought was the right thing
Right.
at the time. And I know he was. I know he believed that that was the right place. He believed all of that. And when he didn't, he was trying to get us out. And luckily, my parents and my sister did leave after we were excommunicated. My parents and sister were done.
Well,
They
good.
all left
Yeah.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, there was quite a large exodus of House of Yahweh members in general at that time had left, um, because there were a lot of people who just were not going to comply with that teaching. And I think,
Yeah.
and that was okay with the House of Yahweh. That was okay with Israel Hawkins, because I guess he felt like he was in his. I'm sure it was a sermon. I'm separating the wheat from the chaff, and
Right.
and and
Yeah.
and all the ones who are leaving are just unworthy, and they weren't called, and they aren't meant to be, and they aren't part of the 144,000. I
Many
didn't
have
hear the
called.
sermon, but I can
Yeah.
hear it.
Many have been called, but you are the chosen.
Yes. Yes. They see exactly. You could write the sermon too.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Wow.
Um,
Huh.
yeah. So, and and some of the other strange teachings, you guys might be interested in, is one of the other things that happened after I left. With the controlling aspect is they literally built a wall up in the sanctuary, separating the men from the women,
Wow.
Wow.
and and they said it was because they were saying it was because women were unclean when they were on their periods, and they were very, very strict about that, because women that were on their periods or had just had given birth had to use a separate door. They had to
Wow.
sit in separate seating areas. They had to sit on placemats, and they were treated as less as subhuman. They were treated
Wow.
as lesser citizens because they were considered unclean, and they weren't allowed to make any of the men unclean by interacting or
Wow.
That was the story. Here's the reality. This after deconstructing. The reality is that the reason that they separated the men from the women is because they didn't want the young women to see the young men and be like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm attracted to that young man there and I want to marry him." No, you have to marry this old elder who's 60. I know you're 16, but you're going to marry this 60-year-old elder and you're going to be his fourth wife and you're going to be happy about it.
Wow.
They didn't want the competition of the young men being able to see the young
Right.
women because young people are attracted to each other. Young girls aren't naturally
Mhm.
attracted to 60, 70-year-old men.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they wanted first pick. They wanted first pick of which young women they were going to marry. And they decided then who was going to marry who after that, which young man could marry which young woman. And they dictated all of that.
Wow.
And they got to the point where even their shopping, they had their own store, they slaughtered their own animals, they made their own butter and milk, and they weren't people weren't allowed to get any of this stuff from the regular store. No, they claimed that they did all this. Now I later heard rumors that he would send people to Walmart to buy their old meat that was on sale getting ready to expire, and
Wow.
he
Wow.
would mark it as if they had slaughtered it themselves
Oh.
and sell it at like three times the price to his members of the
Wow.
Oh
congregation.
my.
So it
Wow.
was another one of his money making schemes,
Yeah.
another one of his cons.
Wow.
And the doomsday teaching became more aggressive after I left, to
Mhm.
the point where they built a bomb shelter and they started having like practicing where they all had to go into this bomb shelter. And I know that was, and as far as I know, they're still doing that. And I'm sure that is to reinforce the fear because, if you're pretending that you're being bombed,
Yeah.
that's going to keep you in this state of fear to where
Yeah.
you
Right.
don't want to leave, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
well, at least if I'm here, I have this shelter and it's going to
Yeah.
protect me. Um, and, you know, women weren't even allowed to talk to men or socialize with men. It got to the point where I have a friend who has a brother that was also in the House of Yahweh at the time. She wasn't even allowed to go visit her brother, and she was told it's because they might start having sexual feelings for each other. So she
Wow.
wasn't allowed to go to his house and visit him. That was a lie too. They
Yeah.
weren't worried about her having sexual feelings towards her brother. The real reason that for that was because heaven forbid if one of you starts waking up and thinking
Right.
critically, you
Yeah.
might
Mhm.
actually have a conversation with your brother saying, "Hey, what do you think about that sermon? How do you feel about this teaching?" We don't want to talk about that. You're not allowed to have feelings about the
Yeah.
teachings. You're just supposed to follow them.
Yeah. Wow.
So like after the polygamy teaching started, and I guess like I don't know if you would know this or not, but I'm always like everybody knows that this polygamy stuff goes on, and I'm like wondering like why doesn't law enforcement like when it comes to kids like marrying
Hmm.
like older men, it's like what's the barrier there, you think?
Okay. Well, I have some theories on this. First of all, I think that most of this is done under cloaks of secrecy, right? Most
Oh
of this
yeah.
is not done in the open. And they aren't legal marriages. These are just marriage ceremonies performed by the cult. There's no legal paperwork done. So that's first and foremost. I think it's really hard for law enforcement to prove these things.
Mhm.
Us ex members believe that law enforcement in that area may be being paid off
Mhm.
Yeah.
because he was arrested for bigamy and breaking child labor laws at one time. He was in jail for that. They ended up dropping the charges for the bigamy. They did keep the child labor charges on there, and he had to serve some community service or something, so many hours of it. He basically got a slap on the wrist. But they said the reason for that was because Callahan County could they his lawyer got him a change of venue, and they were moving the case from Callahan County to somewhere in Dallas.
Mhm.
And Callahan County basically said, "We can't afford to bring all these witnesses to this other county and house them and feed them for how many days this trial might go on." And there may have been truth to that, but I still think there was some kind of payoff. I
Yeah.
Yeah.
just feel like even if they had said we're only going to bring the witnesses that can afford to house themselves or feed themselves, or I mean, I think there was more to the story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the other way they hide it, this is interesting. You guys will find this interesting because have you ever interviewed any Mormons, ex
We haven't.
Mormons?
Not yet.
Mm-mm.
Um, if you know anything about Mormonism, Joseph Smith is like their prophet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph Smith back in the day had everybody, and Israel Hawkins stole this teaching like he stole a lot of his other teachings. He took a little bit of, Judaism, a little bit of Christianity, a little bit of, Seventh Day Adventist, a little bit of Jehovah's Witnesses, all of it. I say he had the salad bar of cults, but I think they all do it. They all pick and
Yeah.
choose from all
Mm-hmm.
these other religions, and they find out from the other cult leaders. I still swear they have a playbook, and they all talk to each other
Yeah.
because when you hear the way they behave and act, you're like, are these guys go to a conference to learn this stuff?
Right.
Where are they
Right.
figuring this
Yeah.
out? Because it's diabolical, right? You're like, how are
Mm-hmm.
they doing this? Um, but Joseph Smith had all when they were hiding from the government and polygamy, he had everybody um, that was part of the Mormon church at that time change their name to Smith.
Okay.
And why did he do this? He did this because if the law enforcement came in and wanted to know who's married to who and whose children's are whose, it was very difficult for them to figure it out when everybody had the same last name.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did
Mm-hmm.
Israel Hawkins do? He made it another teaching he changed after I left was that everybody and he turned it he made it sound biblical. There was some scripture he used and he had all this, I don't know, it was like this illusion that he pulled over the wool over everyone's eyes and said there's scriptural reasons that everybody needs to change their last name to Hawkins. So they all changed their last name to Hawkins. So then when law enforcement comes in, but nowadays, if law enforcement wanted to press the issue, just like the Warren Jeffs deal, all
Mm-hmm.
you need is DNA, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
you could figure out whose kids are whose. You may not be able to figure out who's married to but if you figure out who the mother is and you figure out who the father is,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
obviously you'll figure out who was married to who.
Yeah.
Back in the Joseph Smith days when Joseph Smith did this, there was not DNA, so they wouldn't
Yeah.
have been able. But Israel Hawkins took this tactic and used it because it at least made it more difficult for law enforcement to go in there and figure out who was married to who
Yeah.
and whose children were whose just on a surface level. It made it more difficult. And we all know DNA tests are expensive and they take a
Yeah.
lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that part of it is kind of convoluted and crazy, but that was some of the ways in which the House of Yahweh tried to circumvent the law and tried to get around that. Um, and I know that, like I said, all of the underage marriages are done in secrecy,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
especially those. But they had gotten to the point where no marriages were public, or nobody had a traditional looking wedding with a dress and walking down the aisle. Nobody did that
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't want any women to have that expectation, because then all the subsequent wives would have that expectation and they weren't going to do that. And a lot of the men at that point, I think, weren't even legally marrying a first wife now. So now there were
Yeah.
no legal marriages, no marriages on paper, except for the ones they were getting from the Philippines, because they were going to the Philippines and getting wives and bringing them back.
Oh
Wow.
So,
wow.
which
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to say is basically sex trafficking. I mean, they were
Right.
bringing these women over here under false pretenses. I don't think they knew they were bringing them over here to put them in a cult environment and live in campers, because that's how most of these wives live, is they live in squalor. Like, they live in dilapidated campers even in the winter.
Mm-hmm.
They live in dwellings that aren't even made to be winter dwellings, and they're living in these dwellings all year long.
Wow.
And they're not even men aren't even expected to financially take care of their wives. They're basically, the wives are all expected to financially take care of themselves.
Wow.
Wow. That's crazy.
Oh, that was the other thing. The men weren't even allowed to live with their wives when they were on their periods. They couldn't even live in the same house because they couldn't share the same toilet. They couldn't sit on the same couch. They couldn't eat off the same utensils. So all the men had their own separate houses,
Mm-hmm.
and the women would live in their own separate houses. And the men decided who they wanted to visit and when. And the
Mm-hmm.
women were never didn't know who was married to who. They didn't know how many wives their husband had, and they weren't allowed to ask.
So
Wow.
they kind of acted like the Old Testament priest in
Yes.
a way.
Yes,
I would have
absolutely.
been on my period all month. I would just leave it out. You know?
I will see you, Tammy. I agree with you. I'd be like, "Don't be coming to my house. I'm still
Yeah.
bleeding, buddy.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah,
You
Tammy would have been a
skedaddle."
problem child.
I would have been rebellious in that type of setting. Yeah,
she
because
she'd
yeah,
been excommunicated quickly.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You would have been with me. You would have had that excommunication letter.
hmm
Um,
yeah,
so I took a lot of years to do all this deconstructing. In 2009, I started a Facebook group for just members of the House of ex members of the House of
awesome.
Yahweh.
Yeah.
That was so that we could find each other and try to
hmm
support each other.
Yeah,
And then in 2020, I started another Facebook group called Cult Escape and Recovery. That one
hmm
is basically a little more broad, it covers more cults.
hmm
And I started that group because there was another ex member that was a friend of mine that died of an overdose. And I will
mm,
say he was not the first, and I'm sure he will not
hmm
be the last that had so much trauma that there was
hmm
substance abuse issues after
yeah,
leaving.
Yeah.
And I just felt like I wasn't doing quite enough to help survivors. And I thought, I want to help anybody who was in
hmm
any cult at that point. So I broadened my reach by starting that group. And then the Cultimatum podcast came along actually just last year in 2024. And that my co host Andrew had reached out. He actually posted in the Cult Escape and Recovery group and was looking for people to come on his podcast. At that time, it was called the Anonymous Andrew podcast. And he was just looking for people to come on and talk about their cult experience because he had
hmm
learned about the Twin Flames Universe cult,
Yeah. hmm
and he just started becoming very curious about the cult world and wanted to know how it worked and how people ended up in these groups. And so I went on his podcast and shared my story, and then he was like, "Hey, wait a minute, don't leave right after this." And then
Yeah.
he's like, "How would you feel about co-hosting just a
Yeah.
cult podcast with me?" He said, "I think I want to do kind of a spinoff and turn this into its own podcast."
Yeah.
And that is how I ended up doing the Cultimatum podcast with Anonymous Andrew. And that has been a big part of my recovery, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys, with doing this podcast, you can relate to that.
yeah,
hmm
Helping
Oh
other
yes.
people tell their stories and find their voices,
Yes.
it
hmm
helps heal you. You feel like because when you realize what happened to you, you do want to shout it from the rooftops, don't
Yes.
you?
yeah,
You're
yeah,
just like, I want
absolutely.
everybody to know. I want to warn people.
Yes. hmm
And it feels empowering to be able to give other people a platform to do that
hmm
shout out, to speak their
Absolutely.
truth and come on and share their
Amen.
stories.
Yeah.
And it's really is very therapeutic, isn't it?
And
Yeah. Yes.
we like to talk about stuff that's not typically talked about in church because
Right?
like coming from that environment that you're not allowed to ask questions,
Yes.
and
Yes.
if God can't answer your question, you're serving the wrong God.
Yes.
You-
Yes. It's funny because we had a guest on our podcast that she had said a friend of hers actually said to her that if your religion can't be questioned, you probably need to question your religion. And I thought
Right.
that's a
Absolutely,
good quote.
yeah.
hmm Yeah.
And it's not that we claim to have all the answers. I mean, there's still questions that we have about certain things, but like there shouldn't be that atmosphere where you can't ask,
Right.
or
Absolutely. Exactly. You know, knowledge is power. And and I used to tell my kids that when I was raising my kids, that there is no such thing as a stupid question.
it's
Uh,
hmm
a
exactly what we say.
Yeah,
hmm
I'm like, a question is a question, and if you have a question, you can't find the answer if you don't ask it. So yeah,
Right.
ask
Yeah,
any
hmm
question you want, because that's how we learn. That's how we learn as people and human beings, and that's how we teach each other. And now with the internet and Google, you can find so many answers. My kids were raised in the early Google eras, and they used to tease me about, Mom, you want to Google everything. I'm like, you guys don't realize how cool this is. Like, we
Yes.
had to go to the library and
Yes.
look up books and hope the information was in that book.
The
And if it
old
wasn't, then
card
you had to try to
catalog.
find an encyclopedia.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have any other questions about my story in particular, or anything you want me to go into further detail in? Because I mean, there's a lot more kooky stuff, but I told a lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if and yeah, you're welcome here anytime. I can't think of anything right now, but like
Yeah.
if there's ever anything that you want to come back on and talk about, you have an open invitation.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed coming on the show, and I don't get to share my story quite as much because
Yeah.
I'm, having inviting other people on, doing what you guys do and letting other people share their stories. So
And
this was
I,
a nice change for me.
Yeah.
I will say
Mhm.
this, and I'm not trying to come off as like spiritual, spooky, creepy, or anything, but it's like I do feel like I thank you for giving people a voice,
Yeah.
and it's like I feel like you're doing God's work, and like in this journey, it's like you will find Him, like in
That doesn't
I
come off as creepy at all.
it's like
Mhm.
I know like you're very reserved because of what you come
I
from, but
am.
it's like he's going to start, and he already has. I mean, he's
Right.
going
He
to start
said he'd
revealing,
already.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
going to start revealing
Mhm.
himself in little ways
Yeah.
that only you will know that it's him,
Mhm.
because that's how personal he is with us.
What I will say is that I don't ever see myself in an organized religion again.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
don't ever see myself as a member of a congregation of any sort.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean that I won't ever believe in a higher power or a heavenly father? No.
Mhm.
Like you said, I am still reserved. The
Yeah.
jury's still out for me.
Yeah.
I have a very
Mhm.
open mind about it, and I feel, oh, it's just still a little bit conflicted, but it's something I'm still working through. But
Yeah.
I so
Mhm.
appreciate that, and I do absolutely
and
understand and can relate to what you're saying, because I appreciate what you guys are doing. You're doing the same thing, right? You're giving
Yeah.
yeah,
survivors voices, and I
Yes.
love that.
and
Mhm.
that's kind of like what we do. It's like we don't like we go to church, but that's not our preferred. It's like we go to church to be able to help other people,
Yeah.
but like if say every church burned down in America, we would
Right.
still be fine.
And our motto is, after we have deconstructed and been through a lot of therapy, not only with Mickey and I, but outside therapy, is it's about relationship over religion. And
Oh,
so we
absolutely.
teach our youth kids it's relationship, it's not religion. And so, we're raising them up to believe, that it's a religion tells you who you can be.
And who you can't be.
Yeah, and who you can't be.
Yeah, that's funny you say that, because I do remember shortly after leaving, I cannot remember the author, but my dad was reading this book called More Jesus, Less Religion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I
Mhm.
think I read that book too, and I think that I wish I knew who the author was, just so I could give him credit on here. But that was a very good book to read, because that actually helped me more with my
Yeah.
deconstruction than any counselor ever
Yeah.
did.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
And
Well,
for anybody who might be looking for help with deconstruction too, if you're on social media, I'm going to say follow Stephen Hassan. He does the bite model. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. He's a very good one that will help you with your deconstruction process as well. And I,
Wonderful.
okay.
I know he
Mhm.
has at least one or maybe multiple books out there as well that are very helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap everything up. But after we hop off here, just kind of hang tight for a minute. I got
Make sure
somebody.
everything's uploaded.
Yeah, I want to make. I want to give you a recommendation if you're
Okay.
looking for a guest.
Okay.
But
Excellent.
Okay.
we'll wrap it up for now. Thanks everybody for watching. And like I said, Melody, you have an open invitation. Just have your people contact my people, and we'll make it happen.
Thank you
My
so much,
people is me and
Alex.
Andrew.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Well, just like I'm sure yours is you and
Me
Tammy.
and Tam.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mick and
All
Tammy. It
right.
was very nice to meet you. I appreciate it.
Alrighty. We'll
Awesome.
see you
You
guys.
too.